This is a film about one man's dream which could come true because of a most unlikely event that happened some 7 or 8 years ago. But the story starts even earlier than that, and it's set in this charming little hamlet in a quiet corner of West Sussex. Flansham is a small, friendly community midway between Bognor and Littlehampton. Many of the houses here are beautifully converted old farm buildings, rather like this one. Mind you, Little Byre didn't look like this 20 years ago. In the early 90s, it was a dilapidated old barn that wasn't even weatherproof. This was the way it looked when Brian Rockall bought it, and over the next few years he turned it into this charming and delightful home where he now lives with his wife Hilary. Most of the conversion work he did himself, which is not surprising because Brian ran a small and successful business designing and building beautiful conservatories and summer houses. As a young man, Brian was apprenticed to Hilliard's, a boat-building firm in Littlehampton. He's a skilled draftsman, engineer, and very accomplished joiner and carpenter, and one summer recess, some years ago, took on an unusual assignment. He agreed to change over 100 doors in this school over one weekend. A tall order for his team, and so Brian designed a clever jig which knocked hours off one of the most difficult and time-consuming parts of the job. He patented it, demonstrated it to Trend Machinery and Cutting Tools of Watford. They agreed to produce it commercially, and almost immediately it took off, and was so successful that Brian could now afford to retire. He erected a large temporary shed in a field adjacent to his home, moved in his power tools, and embarked on his lifelong dream, a dream that could be about to come true. For the last 6 years, 5 days a week, Hilary has seen him off at 7 o'clock each morning, and almost single-handedly he has worked until 6 o'clock each evening on his 45-foot ocean-going yacht. Not surprisingly, his friends and neighbours have nicknamed him Mr. Noah. And to see this beautiful boat nearing completion, I was interested to know how it all began. I mean, how do you start to build a boat like this? What's the first job?
We first started was obviously laying the keel. And the keel is 40 feet long and 16 inches by 8 inches. Quite a heavy piece of timber. And I've basically laid out the keel on stocks, which are the short posts in the ground, set in the ground, and we set the keel onto that, but laying flat. I thought that sort of 8 or so people could probably give us a lift up and just hold it in position whilst we temporarily strutted it. And we tried very hard, and it was just too heavy for 8 people to move up. We had to run off and get block and tackle and chain tackles. But we managed it on the day, and once that keel was there, you felt as if you were going somewhere.
Brian needed a reliable source for the quality of the timber that he wanted, and his old friend Tom Compton, who runs English Woodland, was able to supply the oak for the keel and ribs, and the larch for the planking was sourced locally, all from trees that Brian was able to hand pick. The Douglas fir for the mast came from Cowdray Park. The cost of transport for 2 trees was much the same as one, so Brian bought a spare whilst he was at it. Remember, he trained as a shipwright, a craft that he feels is dying out, so he was determined that his boat was going to be built properly, the way boats have been built for centuries.
It is dying because most of the boats are fiberglass now, or composite, and you get into a simple way of having just a few tools on a building site. But boat building, you need all the tools that you can lay your hands on, because there's always one that will do better than another. I hadn't picked up an adze perhaps 30 years before I started to look at building this boat, and I had to really learn how to hold it again, how to manipulate it, from making sure first of all that it was sharp again, sharpening it, and then just really being able to use it. You can just take the slither off just as if it was a plane. And that just takes ages to come back to you and really realise how to do it again. But you need all these different tools to get into the curves of the wood.
On the subject of curves, just take a look at the nearly completed hull and admire the glorious shape. Not only beautiful, elegant, sweeping curves, but very strong construction that's totally seaworthy and stable in rough weather. To achieve this sort of perfection, each pair of the supporting ribs are slightly different, and they have to be very accurately machined. Every one of the 1 3/4 inch thick planks is also unique and has to be shaped on all 4 sides along its entire length before being steamed and curved to fit. You need great technical skill and accurate working drawings to achieve this sort of perfection.
When I retired, I'd been thinking of building a boat, and so when the business was closed down, we cleared the workshop out and actually put plywood down on the floor of the workshop so that we could actually draw the boat out in full size. And we had basically an A4 drawing of the shape of the boat that we were looking for, and from this little A4 sketch we took off and laid out on our plywood, full-size plywood sheeting, a grid system where we transferred all those little measurements and got a body form of the boat. And then we took off the offsets because I needed to send it to the naval architect, all the table of offsets, so that he could put it onto his computer and be assured that the boat will float, that I've got the design right.
The boat began to take shape, and for over 2 years Brian worked 5 days a week in all weathers, and of course he did have plenty of willing help when it was needed.
What we used to do when we got to a stage in the boat build where I could use a great deal of people, then we made it into a little bit of a party, and we do on a Saturday or a Sunday we had a pelleting party, which is when the hull had been completed, all the fastenings were in, and you had to cover the bronze screws and the planking with small pellets of wood. I suppose there was a hole about ½ an inch deep, and they were 5/8 diameter. I made these on the machine, probably about 2,500 of these little pellets, and we had mooring boxes, and then on the party day everybody came and hammered these little pellets into the screw holes, and it was a really good day.
The seasons came and went, the weeks turned into months, the years passed, and the boat progressed. Brian cast 4 slabs of lead, each weighing 3/4 of a ton, and these had to be fixed to the keel. He also made all the special bolts that he needed for these sort of jobs.
I've used a little device where we've got a 1/2 inch, a 12mm, a 10mm and an 8mm clamping system, sectioned with a couple of little cleats in there to hold us in position, and the 2 ledges to fit into a metalworking vise really. But we fit it into there, pop the copper rod in, and we just burr the copper over. It's just a little tool that has helped me make perhaps 200 or 300 bolts on the boat.
Another party was held when the decking was finished and the deck house and most of the superstructure was nearing completion. The interior is now taking shape, but access for the final fitting out will be easier when the boat is in the water.
I'm standing in the forecastle, forward end of the boat. It's going to be our sleeping arrangements here. We've got so that we have a more or less an ensuite bathroom. Still yet to finish the wardrobes behind the door. The galley's designed really for one person to be fitted into. You stand in this area probably with a belt round you when you're at sea. But the sink will be going here. We'll have an ice box in the setting for the food cold store, and this area here will be lift up for the cooker. There'll be a little gas cooker and oven in here, and the actual pieces of curved wood that I was holding a little earlier actually fits round the outside of the galley to give a fiddle rail to it, something so that the crockery doesn't slide off the galley itself, and also it's a handhold for when you're working here.
Brian and his boat have been in this temporary hut for over 6 years, and he isn't the only resident. Several birds regularly nest here, and the owls are a particular irritation. So it seemed to be becoming clear that it was time for someone to move out, and it wasn't going to be the birds. It took a whole day to get the boat onto the trailer. 2 bottle jacks and numerous blocks had to be continuously moved between the crossed members of the trailer, as little by little it was gradually reversed under the vessel, which had to be kept completely upright as it was finally lowered onto the trailer. A supporting rig was welded in place and wedges cut to support it for its short journey to the sea. And it was on May the 29th, 2012 that Brian's baby finally left its nest.
Whee! There we go.
The boat was heavy, the slipway was steep, and a second tractor seemed sensible. Everyone watched, fascinated, as they slowly reversed the trailer down to the water's edge. Well, most of them seemed fascinating. And now the long wait for the tide to come in and float the boat off the trailer. And as the tide began to rise, the rain began to fall, rather heavily. But then, when someone with a nickname like Noah is involved, we shouldn't really have been surprised. Brian's mother had devoted her life to her 3 sons, and he has honoured her memory by naming the boat after her. It was a moving moment when Hilary spoke those simple words.
I'm very proud to be able to name this boat Mary Winifred. God bless her and all who sail in her.
That evening, the harbour launch towed the Mary Winifred to her moorings, coincidentally right opposite the yard where Brian trained as a young man. The workshop, where Mary Winifred was made, is now deserted, like an empty chrysalis. She is happily moored up, awaiting her engine, her mast, and her final fitting out. After that, she will be commissioned and then perform her sea trials. And somehow, I don't think this is quite the end of the story.